Joyce mentioned, my name is Jake Carlson. I'm from the Purdue University Libraries. I'm here also today with Lisa Johnston from the University of Minnesota and Brian Westrop from the University of Oregon, two contributors to the Data Information Literacy Project. Our project really centers on exploring three questions. If we are now expecting researchers to do a better job managing their data, to consider larger issues beyond their own uses, but how do you share it? How do you make it available to others? And how do you try to engender its eventual curation? What are the knowledge and skill sets that researchers need to have to be successful in those endeavors? What do they need to know to be able to do those sorts of things? The second area of exploration is how do we teach those skills? How do we impart those skills to these researchers? And finally, what role can librarians play in this process? What can we do to contribute to skill development in this area? So those are the three questions we're exploring, but we have an underlying assumption that our success in this endeavor, in developing data information literacy, is going to rest on our ability to understand current disciplinary practice and local lab practices, and then to be able to align our own efforts, our own programs, with that understanding. And so to that end, we tried to gather teams. We have 5 teams in this project that consist of folks with different skill sets. So each team is comprised of a data librarian, and a subject librarian or an information literacy specialist. And those teams are partnering with a faculty member in a particular discipline with the goal of providing an educational program to his or her graduate students. That's not good. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have 5 case studies. We have a case study of a group at Cornell who is partnering with a natural resources faculty member, and they're looking at longitudinal data involving fisheries and water quality data in the New York region. Lisa is a part of a team at Minnesota that is partnering with a civil engineering faculty that is examining data on bridge structures. Brian is a part of a team at Oregon that's partnering with an ecology faculty member who is studying climate change and its effect on plant growth. I'm a part of a team at Purdue, which is working with electrical and computer engineering to look at software code and its development as a part of a community service projects. And then we have another team at Purdue as well, who is partnering with a faculty member at Ag and Bioengineering, looking at simulation data of hydrological processes, so water data in particular. The project is being carried out in 3 phases. This is a 2-year project. We're a little more than one year through it, so we're not quite done yet. I'm going to focus mostly on phase 1, which is our information gathering phase, so conducting literature reviews and using that information to conduct interviews with our faculty partners and graduate students. The second phase of the project is to take that information we've gathered from the first phase to develop and implement our educational programs. So the literature review, we really wanted to, again, to get an understanding of how does the discipline see or conceptualize these skills or this knowledge sets. How do they see data management to data curation? How are these expressed? What are the terminologies that they're using? Are there best practices that have already been developed or put out there, or standards that we could look at and try to bring in ways that would be effective for the local situations to inform our programs? And are there educational approaches that have already been developed, again, to facilitate the work that we're doing? Why reinvent the wheel if something is already out there? So we use that information from the literature review, the disciplining understanding, to then feed into our interview process, to get our local understanding of what is the research going on, what is the nature of the research, what is the nature of the data being produced as a result of this research, what are current lab practices with regards to working with the data, and what are the priority areas? Where do the faculty and the graduate students see the need for themselves in developing these sorts of skills? These are the 12 competencies of data information literacy that were developed from a previous research project at Purdue University. These were used as the touchstones for our interview. We weren't necessarily trying to come up with definitive definitions for each of these terms. These are meant to be conversation starters, to start the discussion, to really capture what their perspective on these issues were. And so our methodology consisted of an interview worksheet, which we give to the faculty member or the graduate student we were interviewing. We had them fill out, for each of the 12 competencies, we tried to list out some of the skills that we thought were a part of that particular competency, but again, leaving it open so they could fill in their own particular skill sets that they saw under that particular umbrella, or really emphasize, we think this particular skill set's important under the competency. You can see here the researcher has filled in sort of operating procedures as being a critical component, as well as documentation. We also left room for open-ended questions from our interviewer's manual, really to try and get at, so you mark this as 4, as very important on the Likert scale. Why is this so important? What makes this very important to you? What are the particular aspects that we need to understand in order to develop a program to suit your needs? We transcribed and analyzed the interview results. One thing that we got from the results was a depiction of the data lifecycle. I know this is kind of vague, but we got the data lifecycle from the perspective of the researcher. Again, really to understand the context of the lab and the lab practices. We also got the rankings of importance, and here again, I don't want to put too much stock in the rankings themselves. This is not why we did the interviews, not to get a definitive rank one way or the other, but we did think this was important, again, to further our understanding, to get a better sense of really where were the priority issues. The other thing I want to emphasize here is that we can't generalize these results beyond our particular sample. This was a very small sample. As you can see down below, we had 8 faculty and 17 students, or folks who played supporting roles in the lab. The faculty are represented in the blue line going around the circle, and the students, the folks who we interviewed as students, are represented in red. So this is a small sample. It's also a sample of convenience. But the 2 things I think that are useful to look at in this particular chart is that, on average, everyone here ranked these skill sets, or these kinds of skills, as at least importance, at least as a 3.0, and in many cases at a 4.0, at a very important level. So there really is an interest and a recognition that these are important skills for graduate students to have. And the other thing I think this chart displays is that in some places there are gaps between faculty and student responses on average overall. And again, we can't draw conclusions from our particular instance, but I think this merits further investigation in a more scientific research approach. So some of the things that we saw across the interviews during our analysis is that first there's a lack of formal training in data management. There's sort of 2 factors that plug into this. First, there's an assumption by the faculty that students have already acquired these skills through some other means, through coursework or previous experience. And in their defense, in some cases they were correct. There were some students who we talked to who had those kinds of skills, or at least an understanding of the skills, but that wasn't the case universally. In fact, it was usually the minority of students that possessed that level of understanding rather than the typical outcome. There's also, when training does take place, it is more informal based, and it tends to be more sort of in a hyper-localized context. And it takes place between the faculty and the student on a particular issue, on a particular problem that they're having in order to keep the workflow going. What we found really is that data is still sort of seen as a byproduct of research, but the product drives the workflow. The end result, be it the article or be it whatever scholarly output it is, drives that. And so the focus tends to be hyper-localized and hyper-contextualized on getting that product out the door. There's also a lack of formal policies generally in the research team and the research lab. So rather than having sort of written down policies to indoctrinate a student into the culture of practice in the lab, it's more sort of an oral history kind of approach, and that a faculty member may give sort of an overall introduction to the student, or student may inform student as to how things are done. But here again, it tends to be more at a point of need of, oh, you're at this point and you need to do this particular thing, I'll tell you how to do that particular thing. There's not a larger context behind all of this. The learning that does take place tends to be self-directed, so a student may have a problem or a particular issue. A faculty member will say, well, go out and find the answer yourself, let me know what you find, we'll discuss it. At the level of graduate student, there's an expectation that they will be independent learners, that they will not need to be told this is how you do things, but to go out and explore and form your own solution. But here again, that usually takes place in a hyper-localized context, so the focus on the immediate needs rather than the larger picture. And that also plays into our final sort of synthesis here, the focus on the data mechanics, on how do you do something, how do you correct that particular instance, rather than on the larger, the whys behind this, the larger context behind the work that's being done. So we also came up with a number of local themes based on the interviews that we conducted. Cornell, again with the natural resources, they saw that data sharing inside the lab was an issue. They had some longitudinal data that they wanted to ensure its longevity and sustainability for the lab use itself. And so they constructed a database, but having students, giving students a better understanding of database and database functionality was a key for them. Moving on to Minnesota, They had, their sponsor was a state agency, and so there were a number of questions about ownership surrounding the data, what could or should be done with the data in terms of sharing or preserving, really were a mystery, as well as who should have the responsibility for doing those things. So lots of questions with regards to ownership and long-term access. Oregon faced questions regarding cultures of practice. So they were working pretty much in the lab. There are resources out there in ecology. There's a community out there towards looking at supporting better data management, better data sharing, but they weren't connected to that very well. So introducing sort of cultures of practice and a larger sense of community was an area of work for Oregon. They were also in the process of closing out a grant, and so dealing with sort of the time issues of wrapping up the data and figuring out what to do with it for the long term. At Purdue, working with the Service Learning Organization, there were real questions surrounding documentation and organization of the software code they were producing. Students came in on a regular basis. They had to take what was done previously and understand it well enough to add to it, to complete the project. And that they often spent weeks at a time just trying to figure out what had been done. So they were wasting time developing, putting in effort in places where it didn't really need to happen if they had been able to sort of had a smooth transfer of responsibility from one group, one student to the next. There's also questions of transfer of ownership. There's a product being produced that gets transferred to the client. The client then has to maintain that software code, and so has to understand it well enough to do that, as well as transfer it to the administration to assess the educational impact of the Service Learning Center. Our other group at Purdue, this was a group that actually had some written policies in place with regards to data in the lab, but these policies really weren't enforced. And so their work was taking the policies and developing a checklist as a result of this to make them more actionable and manageable so students could and be held accountable to finishing these things and adhering to the practices that were expected. So our instructional approaches, we each took a different approach based on the environment and the circumstances that we saw. Cornell took an approach of crafting a mini course for credit that will be offered this spring for the Natural Resources Department. Minnesota built an online course for their students. Oregon launched a seminar and provided readings to support the work that they did in the seminar. Us at Purdue, we formed an embedded librarianship model. We started attending Service Learning Organization meetings, participating in design reviews and other events like that. And our other group at Purdue held a series of 3 workshops to convey the information about the checklist and the metadata that they were focusing on. All of these institutional approaches, our third phase will be to take what we've learned and to draw comparisons both in terms of what we did well or what worked well, as well as where we thought things could be improved. And so taking our collective experiences and forming a data information literacy model that can then be used by other librarians at different institutions to start their own program. So the way to sort of take our experiences and leverage that to try and expand and increase our capacity to act in this area. So our next steps, as I said, we're in the process of a 2-year grant. We're through year 1. Some of our teams are still working on instruction, still delivering our instruction. We'll then be assessing our work both from the student perspective as well as from the faculty perspective. How well did we do in terms of addressing the needs they expressed in the interview? We'll then be developing the models I mentioned for our common experiences. We will be holding a data information literacy symposium sometime in late spring or the early summer. We haven't quite figured out what our structure or format will be, but we intend to invite other experts or other folks who are interested in this kind of community, this kind of work, to better get a sense of what this model could or should be, what we could do to further increase capacity for librarians to act in this area. We'll then be publishing both the model as well as the materials that we develop for our own particular case studies, so our learning objects or other context and lesson plans alike. And that will be published on our website. This project involves a number of people. They're listed here to give credit where credit is due. There's been a lot of hard work by these folks. We especially want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services for their financial support. And we are still in process. We have a number of social media links. Our website, we'll be posting the information. The slides will be posted at the website. Our interview protocols are also at the website currently. We'll also have materials once they become available to be published on our website. We have a Twitter feed and a Facebook account as well. So thanks very much, and I'll be happy to take questions.